Hi folks, tonight we drop into the real Roman Empire. Not the marble and glory version, but the part with wet feet, smeared wax tablets, and inspection routes nobody wants. Rome built 11 aqueducts and still couldn't fix a leaking ceiling. Your job? Pretend the water's going where it should. It's 123 CE. You're a junior inspector assigned to the aqueduct system serving Segovia, a municipium on the northern fringe of Hispania. Congratulations. The aqueduct here is impressive in silhouette, less so up close. Your title sounds important when written on a tablet, but in practice you're the first to be blamed and the last to be informed. You report to the field office at dawn, though no one tells you to. There's no bell or schedule, just habit and inference. The office is not a room, but a curtained alcove in a public building once used for grain disputes. It still smells like damp flour and vinegar. You wait for someone to acknowledge your presence. The curtain doesn't move. You cough once, twice. Eventually a clerk steps out with a wax tablet and a chewed fig stem in his teeth. He gestures vaguely toward a pile of chipped measuring rods and hands you the tablet. You nod like you understand what's on it. You don't. The handwriting is shallow, smeared and backward in places. There's mention of flow inconsistency, arch base residue, and one urgent note that reads simply, "Civilians heard gurgling." The map you're issued is out of scale and curled from moisture. It's the same map every time. No one looks up as you leave. You've been assigned this route 3 times this week. That means either nothing's wrong or no one's willing to confirm it. Possibly both. But before you get comfy, if this rhythm speaks to you, let it show. Like, subscribe and say hi in the comments. Let me know where you're listening from. It's always fascinating to see who's drifting through history with us. Welcome to your life as a Roman aqueduct inspector. Now, dim the lights, lie back, take a few deep, relaxing breaths. Imagine the scent of warm limestone dust, faint wax resin, and whatever's fermenting under the clerk's bench. You're in the right place. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. The distribution schedule was formalised years ago by someone who didn't walk the route. You're expected to follow the same order, regardless of condition, daylight or construction. The plan assumes access to all points is clear. That's not the case. You stop first at the storeroom to collect tools. The door doesn't latch, so it's held shut by a length of twine looped through a nail. Inside, everything is dusty. Most tools are repurposed from carpentry, masonry, or farming. You take the chisel with the least rust and a clay pot half filled with sealant. You ignore the rope, it frays on touch, and pocket the folded parchment with past inspection marks. It's unclear who wrote them. Most entries are abbreviated with initials no longer attached to names. One is marked ? Possibly as a name. Outdoors, the air is still cool, though the stone underfoot already radiates heat. You follow a path not marked on your map because it's easier than following the map. A dog barks at you from a bakery roof. You keep walking. The first inspection point is a short retaining wall at the base of a tiered support arch. There is no sign of recent damage, but a slow trickle runs down one leg of the arch and disappears into the gravel. You lean in to examine the stone. It smells faintly of iron and moss. You mark the area with a line of chalk, then stop to check your tablet. There's no box for persistent trickle. You mark unclear. You've used that option more than anything else this month. It has the fewest consequences. Some say Roman infrastructure was built to last 1,000 years. Others say it was just patched quickly enough to outlive its critics. A bee lands on your stylus. You wait. It doesn't leave. You wait longer. Eventually the bee leaves. You finish writing. If it had stayed, you might have filed a delay. You continue to the next arch, past a stone plinth once carved with an emperor's name. It's been scraped off. No one remembers which one. They rarely do. At a broken mile marker, you squat to examine mineral build-up. Your knees ache. The deposit is layered but dry. You scrape it with your nail. It flakes off in chalky sheets. You place a sample into a cloth and tie it shut, though no one has ever asked for one. You collect it because the form says to collect it. You walk back to the main road. Your sandals are coated in lime dust. The right one clicks when you step, possibly from a loose nail. You make a note to repair it later. You won't. A courier on horseback passes you without acknowledgement. You're not permitted to use horses. That privilege is reserved for messengers, magistrates, and certain categories of grain inspector. You step off the road and wait for the dust to settle. The dust settles slowly. Back at the junction, you find the wax tablet softening in the sun. You rewrap it in linen, rotate it so the text is legible again, and place it between two flat stones for stability. You take a drink from your leather water pouch. The water tastes faintly of wax. You reseal the lid and check the time by the shadow cast from the arch. The last entry reads, "Investigate anomaly near poultry." It isn't marked with a district stall or name. You walk toward the nearest vendor. If it's the wrong one, no one will correct it. The Castellum Divisorium distributes flow to 3 separate channels. It was built atop a shallow rise, just far enough from the main road to be inconvenient and just close enough that people notice when something goes wrong. You're required to check it weekly, unless it rains. Then you're required to check it again. There's no shelter at the base, just tool marks, faded chalk scribbles, and a bent spike that once held a sign. The ladder is kept nearby, propped against a half-buried amphora no one has claimed. It's made of wood, but not one kind of wood. Each section seems to have been replaced by a different person at a different time with a different priority. One rung is darker than the rest. Another is bound with a leather strap. The leather may have been part of a sandal, or a sling. There's no way to know without removing it, and removal isn't part of the checklist. You lift the ladder into position, and test it with a foot. It flexes more than it should. You climb anyway. There's no designated inspection platform, just a rounded stone lip and a faint groove where other inspectors have stood, leaned, or slipped. It's often claimed that Roman engineers designed the castellum to allow precise redirection of water flow across sectors. In practice, most adjustments rely on guesswork, habit, and a willingness to get wet. At the top, you kneel on a slanted edge and peer into the distribution chamber. The central basin is divided into 3 channels, though none are flowing evenly. The northernmost duct is nearly dry, the middle surges slightly, and the southern outlet shows signs of backflow, likely pressure imbalance or a clog. You lean in and flick a stick through the water's edge to dislodge floating debris. A thin layer of mineral film breaks apart, revealing a piece of waxed string and what might be animal fur, possibly goat, possibly not. You adjust one of the small flow gates. It sticks halfway, then jumps forward, splashing your tunic and leaving a wet streak across the back of your arm. You wipe it against the wall, which is already damp. There's no cleaning cloth provided, there never is. The interior is covered in a thin but stubborn ring of calcium. You use the edge of your stylus to scrape at it lightly, just enough to confirm build-up is continuing. You make a note. The wax on your tablet has gone soft again, so the stylus leaves more dent than mark. A bee crawls out from under a corner tile near the overflow vent. It walks a few steps along the rim and stops. You wait for it to move. It does not. You brush it aside gently. It still does not fly. In several towns across Hispania, castellum towers were topped with leftover tiles stamped by military suppliers, typically reused from garrisons or armament warehouses. In theory, this served both as identification and material reuse. This particular tower roof is patched with 5 distinct types of tile. 2 are terracotta, 1 is slate, 1 appears to be ceramic, and the last is not a tile at all, but a broken drainage cover wedged into place with wax and a shard of bone. You document roof patching inconsistent on your tablet. The word inconsistent is used frequently in your notes. It signals attention without requiring follow-up. Descending the ladder is slower. A piece of grain or stone is lodged in your sandal, and 1 rung shifts under your weight. You pause, press down with both feet, and continue. There are no safety requirements aside from completing the descent without injury. Success is self-evident. At the base, you recheck the list. The next task reads, Confirm deposit depth, marker 147. You repack the tools. You leave the ladder where it is. There's no designated storage. Sometimes the wind knocks it over. When that happens, it stays down until the next inspection. You begin walking east. The path curves along the base of the aqueduct. Someone has left a pile of chipped roof tiles on the side of the trail. You step around them without stopping. There is no repair order attached. You make no record. A courier passes by on a donkey. His scroll case is open, and several tablets are visible, one marked with an urgent seal. He does not greet you. You are not required to greet him. Interaction across departments is discouraged unless written authorization is given. You nod, silently. He does not nod back. You pass a low wall with a carved dedication. The text refers to a former official whose name has been chipped away. It's unclear whether the erasure was due to damnatio memoriae or just civic frustration. You do not speculate. You check the wall for leaks. There are none. At a short bend in the trench, you stop to check your stylus. The end is chipped, possibly from contact with the stone lip earlier. You flip it and use the opposite end. The surface is blunted but adequate. The channel hums faintly as water moves beneath the surface. A pigeon watches you from a nearby arch. It flaps once, then settles again. You do not look at it. You reach marker 144. The next inspection point is further ahead. You keep walking. The marker is carved into the side of a retaining stone, shallow and eroded. The number is still legible, though the final numeral has chipped away and someone has redrawn it in charcoal. That someone could have been you last week, or someone else the week before. No one logs minor adjustments. You crouch beside the channel and remove a bronze dipstick from your satchel. The tool is bent slightly from use, and the engraved lines are faded near the tip. You lower it into the water, hold it still, and wait for the shudder to pass as the current settles. You lift it again. The waterline is below the expected mark. The wax tablet lists the acceptable range. This falls just inside the margin. You press the stylus gently into the check mark beside M147-south, though you do not erase last week's mark. The surface is already crowded. It's often claimed that Roman aqueducts were engineered with remarkable precision. Gradients calculated to the millimetre over miles of terrain. In application, debris, warping, theft, sediment, evaporation, and animal interference make precision an aspiration, not a result. You lean back and examine the stone lip. There's a greenish smear at the edge where moss is beginning to take root. It doesn't impede the flow, but it makes the surface slippery. You step carefully. You check the secondary channel, a narrow overflow duct designed to divert excess to a storage tank downhill. It is dry. The tank has been dry for weeks. You don't include that in the report. It's not assigned. Near the marker, a pile of loose pebbles suggests either minor erosion or someone scraping dirt into a more comfortable seat. There are no guidelines for determining which. You return the dipstick to your satchel and remove a small folding reed gauge. It's meant for measuring sediment buildup but has not been calibrated in months. Calibration requires a workshop in Taraco and someone willing to transport it. You measure anyway. The channel bed shows 1.8 centimetres of silt. The maximum allowable is 2. You write watch next to the result, knowing the word is vague enough to pass in either direction. In some districts, inspectors supplemented their wages by selling discarded sediment as agricultural filler. There are no official penalties for this, though an edict was once issued discouraging excessive private collection. You have never met anyone who received this warning personally. As you stand, your knees pop. You stretch one leg, then the other, and glance toward a goat standing several meters away. It is chewing something that might be papyrus. You are not responsible for animals, unless they cause damage. You do not intervene. You take a quick visual sweep of the nearby support stones. There are no visible cracks, but the lime runoff from upstream is beginning to pool. You mark it as minor seepage. There's no box for that, so you carve it into the margin. A small nail rests on the ground nearby. It's bent at the tip, possibly dropped during a prior inspection or dislodged by weather. You pick it up, turn it once in your hand, then set it back down. Someone from another department, stonework perhaps, might use it. A breeze moves down the channel. It shifts your satchel flap. You resecure it with the loop of cord and begin walking upstream toward the next minor arch. There is a stopgap wall there, installed 2 years ago after minor flooding. The wall is slightly crooked, and the grout has cracked in several places. You run your fingers across one joint. The mortar is sandy. It pulls loose easily. You take out a small slip of bark and note the location. There's no formal place to file field bark. You store it in the same compartment as the broken stylus. You sit briefly on a flat stone beside the arch. You drink half a mouthful of water, then rinse the dipstick in a nearby puddle and dry it on your sleeve. You check your wax tablet again. No new instructions have appeared. A courier on foot passes by, carrying 3 amphorae strapped to a yoke. He does not acknowledge you. You nod once. He stumbles, rights himself, and continues. None of his cargo spills. You make no entry. You continue walking. You reach the service notch, a narrow access point carved into the outer flank of the channel wall. It's where deposits tend to build first, especially during dry spells when the flow slows just enough for minerals to settle. This section was cleared last season. That doesn't mean it's clear now. You kneel on a flat stone and lean over the edge. There's a visible rim of white crust ringing the waterline, brittle and uneven. A small drift of calcium flakes clings to the inner wall, not thick enough to block flow, but enough to merit documentation. You remove the chisel from your satchel. It's iron, slightly pitted, the handle wrapped in twine where the grip has worn smooth. You set the wax tablet beside you and begin tapping at the edge of the deposit. A few flakes come loose, some fall into the water, some settle on your sleeve. You brush them off, then stop brushing. The deposits return faster than they leave. It's often stated that aqueducts were self-cleaning due to their continuous flow and slight incline, typically a 1 to 4,800 slope. In truth, sediment collects wherever water slows, bends, joints, shallow basins, or any place the channel widens unnecessarily. This is one of those places. You continue scraping, alternating pressure between chisel and knuckles. After a few minutes, the tool catches on a ridge and jerks from your grip. It lands in the channel with a soft splash and drifts just out of reach. You watch it move. It spins once, bobs under, and disappears beneath a shadowed arch. You do not pursue it. There are no recovery protocols for lost tools unless the item is valuable or clearly marked. This one is neither. You open your satchel again. There is a second chisel inside. Shorter, duller, more prone to slipping. You continue working. One lesser-known detail. In some Roman maintenance teams, tools were marked with wax seals or carved initials for accountability. In practice, these identifiers wore off quickly, especially in damp conditions. A few cities implemented tool inventories. Most abandoned them after the first few audits. As you scrape, a pale puff of dust rises from the wall. It clings to your tunic. You pause and squint at the sediment. It's layered in faint striations, white, off-white, grey, like tree rings with less significance. You record the presence of mineral build-up, estimated depth, and approximate location using abbreviated terms. There's no line on the form for chisel lost, so you don't mention it. A frog croaks nearby. You glance to your right and see it perched on a dry ledge beneath the channel. Its skin is the same colour as the sediment. You note no animal interference. Behind you the wind shifts. It pushes a small cluster of reeds against the base of your satchel. One pokes through the binding cord and loosens the flap. You retie it without comment. You test the wall with your knuckle. The tone is hollow. You knock again to confirm the sound isn't an illusion of dust or fatigue. It repeats, dull, not cracked, no action required. You stand, brush the flakes from your knees and mark the inspection as partial. The chisel is no longer visible. You assume it's somewhere between this arch and the basin beyond marker 153. You won't be at that basin today. It belongs to a different rotation. You reseal your satchel and check the sky. The sun has shifted, but there is no designated break period. You're permitted to pause when appropriate according to your assignment scroll. Appropriateness is self-determined and retroactively evaluated. You take 2 steps back, examine the wall from a broader angle, and notice a small protrusion where a former patch has warped. The sealant is splitting slightly at the edge. You scratch it with the stylus tip. The surface flakes. You write "monitor" on your tablet and circle it. The circle smears slightly. The wax is softer than it should be. You blow on it once. It helps minimally. You turn toward the next slope. A mule cart rattles past on the road below. It's loaded with bundles of straw and 3 broken barrels tied loosely with a rope. One of the barrels leaks slightly. No one calls out. At the base of the hill you pause to rinse your hands in a catchment basin. The water is not potable. That rule is printed on a painted stone nearby. The paint has faded. The rule still applies. The basin is partially clogged with leaves and lime residue. You scrape it clean with the back of your stylus and shake the tool dry before returning it to your pouch. You look once more toward the channel where the chisel disappeared. It isn't your first, and it won't be the last. The settling basin is downhill from the main flow, positioned behind a series of partial walls and a weathered fence post that no longer holds a gate. The entrance is unmarked. You identify it by habit. 2 paces past the split in the road, left at the slumped fig tree, then down the slope until the scent changes. The basin's purpose is to collect sediment before water continues to urban distribution. In theory, it slows the current just long enough for debris and mineral fragments to sink. In practice, it holds everything: runoff, leaves, moss, the occasional coin, and more often than you'd prefer, things with legs. You approach from the west side, where the embankment curves low enough to step over without slipping. Your sandals crunch against loose shale and dried algae. The air is stagnant. Movement here is limited, and what does move tends to buzz. You scan the basin first. No animals, no overflow. The surface is still, tinged with a faint yellow-green film at the edges. You kneel and tap the reed measuring rod against the shallower side. The water ripples outward. The rod sinks easily, more easily than expected. You lift the rod, check the depth of settled matter. It reads just under 3 digits in Roman notation. You scrape a little to be sure. The sludge comes up in ribbons. It's often believed that basin cleaning occurred at regular intervals, supervised by municipal teams. Some records suggest cleaning only happened when the smell reached the market. There's a pile of reeds in the northeast corner. They're dry at the base, damp at the tips, and interwoven with bits of hair and what looks like ribbon. Possibly nest material. Possibly someone's lost headband. You note organic build-up without further description. The retaining wall has cracked again. Same spot as last time. You tap it with your stylus handle. It sounds the same as it did 3 weeks ago. Uneven, but not yet crumbling. You mark the date with a simple symbol. Looks like a backward C. Officially it has no name. Unofficially, some inspectors call it the shrug. Others call it reverse carrot, though no one's quite sure why. You add it, followed by initials that may or may not be your own. Nobody checks. You remove a small wooden scoop from your satchel, crouch lower, and collect a sample. The water is lukewarm and resists the tool. A dragonfly lands on your hand mid-motion. You pause. It stays. You wait longer. Eventually it leaves. You complete the scoop and pour it into a sealed amphora marked sediment non-urgent. It joins 4 others in a crate nearby. A lesser-known detail. Some Roman basins were used unofficially for laundry. Not public laundry, civic textiles, cleaning cloths, military wraps, occasionally even priestly garments were rinsed here to avoid clogging the fountains. The edict banning the practice was issued, repealed, and then reissued with smaller lettering. You hear a splash. A lizard leaps from the embankment into the shallow fringe and disappears. You note no interference. There's a scroll pinned to the underside of a loose tile by the basin's southeast corner. It's water-stained, half-legible, and unsigned. You copy what you can onto your wax tablet. Basin fluct, estimated 3 to 4 digits, check. The ink is blue, which is uncommon. Possibly imported. Possibly someone just had a better stylus. You file the scroll inside your satchel, though it's too damp to keep folded. You roll it in cloth and tie it loosely. It will dry unevenly. You'll forget where it came from by the end of the day. The breeze picks up. It moves the top layer of surface scum into a slight spiral. You watch it settle again, undisturbed by your measurements. The fence post creaks. Nothing follows. You recap the amphora, press wax into the seal, and mark the crate with your initials. One corner of the lid is chipped. You rotate the amphora and wedge it in with the others. The crate now holds 5. The report sheet pinned beside it only has 4 lines. You add a 5th in smaller handwriting. You do not have chalk, so you scratch the number in with your stylus. The sun hits your back. You shift positions and feel the sweat forming under your tunic. There's no water ration here, and the basin is unsuitable. You're scheduled to check 2 more points before mid-meal. Neither is close. You lift the crate half an inch to test the weight, then set it down again. It won't be moved until someone orders it. You log the visit. The wax is now mottled with pond dust and insect parts. You wipe the tablet once on your sleeve, once on the edge of your bag, then stop. Nothing else is visibly wrong. You begin walking back uphill toward the next checkpoint, past the crate, past the basin, past the cracked tile and the fig tree. You do not look behind you. The bathhouse sits 3 arches down from the cattle path, tucked behind a colonnade that once had paint. The entrance is flanked by 2 pillars of mismatched height, one carved, one plain. A clay sign out front reads "Bathhouse with permission" in flaking black pigment. It's not enforced. You're not here to bathe. You're here because someone lodged a complaint. According to the wax tablet, flow reduction observed, client disturbance. There's no timestamp, no name, and no clear description of which client or what kind of disturbance. You knock once on the wooden frame. No one responds. You step inside. The air is humid. Not from steam, there is no steam, but from heat trapped in stone. The floor is slick. Somewhere in the walls, water moves slowly. It is not moving in the correct direction. The bathhouse owner appears from behind a draped curtain. His toga is damp at the hem. He points without speaking toward the far wall. A long crack runs from the ceiling to a shallow basin, now dry. He begins listing grievances. Most of them are not actionable. You nod once. He continues. It's often claimed that private bathhouses had separate aqueduct access negotiated through official contracts. In some regions, those contracts were oral, symbolic, or missing entirely, especially if a cousin served in the local forum. You inspect the wall. A lead pipe emerges at a shallow angle, then curves into a bronze connector that isn't original. The seal is darkened with some kind of wax, possibly civic, possibly candle. You touch it lightly with your stylus. It peels away in one motion. The water trickles, then stops. You note the alteration. You do not accuse. The official form has a line for unusual modification. You mark it, then draw a dot beside it in case someone reviews the record and wants to pretend it means something. The owner gestures toward a wooden bench, where a folded towel sits with embroidered initials, LG. You are not told what this means. You do not ask. He hands you a copy of the old access tablet. It's written on thin wax, almost transparent. The seal is chipped. The initials do not match the register you were shown last year. You thank him and place the copy into your satchel, wrapped in a corner of cloth used earlier for a pond scroll. Behind you, a servant refills a basin with water from a ceramic jug. This jug was not issued by the Aqueduct office. You pretend not to see it. A lesser-known detail: enforcement of water rights varied widely. In Rome, officials were dispatched for inspections only if theft or damage could be demonstrated by 2 witnesses. In smaller towns, an irritated letter was sometimes enough, or a favour, or a wine jug left in the wrong doorway. You inspect the secondary valve. It's wedged shut with a cork and what looks like horsehair. Possibly an improvised washer, possibly not. You mark the valve as compromised, and note the need for future review. You don't schedule the review. You don't have authority to schedule anything. Outside the bathhouse, the street is uneven, coated with runoff dust. A girl sits on the edge of a barrel, watching water trickle from a nearby spout. The flow is weak. You don't test it. It isn't listed on the tablet. You walk around the building's south wall and find the unauthorized junction. Someone's redirected part of the flow from the main channel using a split lead pipe and 3 ceramic spacers. The pipe has no stamp. The lead is worn smooth. You mark the finding on your tablet. You draw an arrow. You add subject to confirmation. You do not remove the pipe. There is a process for this, but it requires witnesses and a replacement pipe issued by the municipium. None are present. You step back and trace the pipe with your stylus. It's warm. Someone used it recently. You replace your stylus and record the address with a number that's no longer accurate. The stone engraving at the front of the building has eroded. You base your entry on door position and a nearby tree. You return to the entrance. The owner is gone. The bench is gone. The towel remains. You walk back toward the main road. You're not required to take lunch, but it's expected that you do. Rest when reasonable, the scroll says. No definition of reasonable is included. You choose the gap between inspection points 6 and 7. Flat ground, low wind, enough distance from the last complaint to avoid being called back. The arches in this sector are some of the oldest, predating Hadrian's inspections and possibly even Trajan's involvement. The keystones are worn, and one of the joints is packed with straw, either for warmth or nesting. Possibly both. You sit beneath the eastern arch. There's no shadow here, only brightness and heat pressed into stone. The aqueduct hums faintly above you. The water moves. You don't hear it, but you feel its weight overhead. You open the cloth wrap. Inside, bread slightly hard, olives heavily salted, and 1 fig already bruised. You eat them in order. You do not savour them. It's often claimed that municipal workers received food stipends or basic rations. Records suggest these were sometimes distributed in the form of raw grain or vinegar concentrate, depending on the month and supply surplus. You bring your own. The wineskin is warm. You sip it anyway. It tastes of leather and whatever herbs were stored in it last month. You make a face. You make no sound. A bee circles your fig. You swat it once. It returns. You hold the fig lower and wait. The bee lands. You flick it gently and finish eating. There's no designated bench, so you sit on a slab of stone where names were once carved. The carvings are shallow now, erased by time or someone with time. You press your heel into one groove and shift your weight. A small breeze moves across the field. It picks up lime dust from the aqueduct base and delivers it directly into your eyes. You blink. You rub once. The sting lingers. You drink again. You check your wax tablet. It's beginning to warp from the heat. You rotate it 180 degrees to keep the wax from pooling at the bottom edge. A stylus scratch from earlier has melted into a shape that resembles nothing official. You press the surface flat with your thumb and move on. You spot movement above. Pigeons. 3, maybe 4. They land at the channel lip, peck once, flap once, then disappear. Their presence is not a reportable offence, though their nests sometimes block minor sluices. You note none today. One lesser-known detail: some aqueduct workers in Rome were paid partly in amphora shards. broken pottery used as writing tablets, or makeshift currency for small trades. The practice was never formalised, but it persisted through several administrations. You still carry a few for notes. You have not traded one. You reach into your satchel and retrieve a flat piece of broken tile. The surface is scratched from past entries. You use it now to record the water pressure at the last checkpoint, forgotten earlier, unlogged. You etch a line, then a second, then stop. The surface is uneven. You return the shard to the cloth pouch with the others. The fig pit remains in your hand. You flick it into the grass. Your sandal is pinching again. The strap you repaired last week is holding, but the knot has moved. You loosen it with your fingers, retie it twice, and accept that it will come undone later. A courier passes in the distance, too far to recognise, but close enough to register. You nod. He does not. The wineskin is empty. You twist the mouth shut and tuck it beneath your satchel. It presses against the corner of a stylus case. You adjust it. The adjustment fails. You rest your back against the arch and listen for water. You hear pigeons instead. One coos above you. A droplet hits your arm. You check your tablet again. The next entry is smudged from the fig. You read Arch 7 flow obs dash. You recognise your own shorthand. You stand. You gather the cloth wrap, the stylus, the melted wax scrap, the broken tile and the empty skin. You check the area for lost items. You check again. Nothing moves. You begin walking east toward Arch 7. You reach the maintenance path behind Arch 7. The stone here is darker, not from age but from shade cast by a fig tree someone tried and failed to prune. Leaves litter the ground, curling at the edges, damp where they shouldn't be. You're scheduled to check 2 low-level runoff hatches in this section. The first is along the base wall, partially buried, poorly sealed. You crouch. The grate is ajar. It creaks on contact. Something moves inside. You pause, then lift the cover fully. A rat scurries out, followed by a second. Both disappear into the undergrowth. You wait for a third. Nothing. You make a note. You've been told animal interference is to be recorded but not addressed unless the animal poses a threat. Threat is defined loosely. Rats don't qualify. Boars do. You've never seen a boar on shift. You don't ask for clarification. The runoff channel is partially blocked. Twigs, feathers, and some fibrous material that might be cloth or part of an old scroll. You prod the mass with your stylus. It shifts but doesn't dislodge. It's often noted that aqueduct channels were designed with protective grates and hatches to prevent intrusion. Archaeological surveys suggest that many of these covers were removed, reused, or left open to prevent pressure build-up, or because no one could remember where the spare keys were stored. You reach for the stick you carry for this purpose. It's not in your satchel. You use a reed instead. The clog breaks apart slowly, drifting downstream. You do not follow it. You check the stone lip for bite marks. There are 3, not fresh but not old. You note chewing consistent with rodent. You do not speculate further. Behind you, a crow lands on the top of the aqueduct. It watches. It calls out once. You ignore it. You continue to the second hatch. This one is narrower, tucked beneath a crumbling stair that no longer leads anywhere. A rusted latch holds the cover in place. You open it with the edge of your wax tablet. The tool is not intended for this purpose. It works anyway. Inside, a bird's nest is wedged into the corner just above the waterline. Dry grass, bits of wool, a blue bead, a twist of wax twine. The nest is not causing a blockage. You leave it in place. You make a mark on your tablet. You abbreviate the note, N/S obstruction, live use. That phrase is meant to signal someone else to inspect it. No one does. During colder months, workers sometimes left small bundles of fabric in the dry tunnels to discourage nesting in operational zones. These unofficial offerings became semi-standard in some provinces. They were never written into code. A lizard appears beneath the stair. It watches you work, blinks once and disappears again. You do not write this down. A mule is tied to a marker post nearby unattended. The rope is looped in a double knot, the kind used for deliveries but not for long hauls. No cart is attached. You walk around it. You check your stylus. It's sticky from earlier use, possibly fig, possibly wax. You clean it against the corner of your tunic. On the next rise, you see hoofprints crossing the runoff channel. Recent. You note them as light livestock contact. It's a broad enough term to apply to anything with legs under a certain weight. You pass a discarded scroll half buried in grass. The outer wax layer is cracked. The script is unfamiliar. You don't open it. You press it flat and place a small stone on top. If it's important, someone will retrieve it. You feel something nudge your foot. A small dog, covered in dust and wearing a frayed collar. It sniffs the corner of your satchel, sneezes, and trots off toward the fig tree. You don't follow it. You don't name it. You finish the inspection route and mark both hatches as monitored. You rewrap the stylus and adjust the satchel strap. One buckle is beginning to fray. You make no note. You pass the mule again on your way out. It's chewing a leather strap. You begin walking back toward the channel junction. No more animals cross your path. The office isn't really an office. It's a bench in a covered portico attached to the side of a grain storage hall. 2 stools, 1 table, 1 stylus shared among whoever arrives first. You bring your own. The scribe on duty today is asleep with his head resting on a folded scroll. The wax tablet beside him bears the imprint of his cheek and part of a thumbprint. You take a seat on the opposite side and unroll your satchel. The scroll paper you're given is thin. Too thin for real ink, thick enough to smear charcoal. You opt for wax entries instead. Fewer words, less mess. Your tablet lists today's inspections. 7 completed, 1 deferred, 2 marked, pending review, with no recipient named. You copy the codes into the margins of a shared ledger. The wax is soft from the heat. 1 line drips and becomes unreadable. You cross it out. You do not rewrite it. It's often claimed that Roman infrastructure relied on meticulous record keeping. In practice, most records served the purpose of confirming someone tried to write something down. Follow-up was another matter. You press your stylus into a fresh line. The point snaps. You flip it and use the wider end. The letters spread unevenly. You finish the sentence anyway. Arch 7, residue, flow tolerable. There is no line for barely. Across from you, the scribe stirs. He does not wake. His pen is still in his hand. You pull out your spare stylus. The end is bent. You scrape it against the table edge until it flattens. It leaves a faint groove in the wood. You do not apologize. You reach into the side pocket of your satchel for the damaged scroll you found near the hatch. The wax outer layer has cracked further. You unroll it carefully. The interior is blank. You re-roll it and label the outside. Found, undated, unknown. You place it in the pile marked miscellaneous. The pigeon coop above the bench clatters. 1 drops a feather into the ledger. You brush it away and leave a smudge on line 6. You do not correct it. The sun reaches the edge of the portico. Your side of the bench heats up. You shift left. The bench groans. No one looks up. 1 lesser-known detail. In the province of Baetica, inspectors used clay slates for fieldwork, which were later shaved and reused. A few offices attempted a return to slates in lean years, citing durability. Most reverted within a month, citing weight and inconvenience. You stack your tablets, 1 full, 1 partial, 1 warped. You bind them with cord and stamp them with the municipium seal. The seal's imprint is shallow from wear. You press harder. It leaves a mark, but not a legible one. You file it anyway. The ledger asks for your initials. You use your usual mark, a single angled line and a cross. It's not registered. You've never been questioned about it. You wipe your hands on your tunic. The sweat lifts most of the wax residue. The rest stays. To your left, a pigeon hops down from the coop and lands on the table. It pecks once at a broken stylus, then at the wax itself. You slide the bird off the table with the side of your hand. It hops away, then returns. You do not repeat the motion. You reach for the amphora beside the bench, standard office water. The rim is chipped. The ladle is missing. You tilt the vessel and let a small stream pour into your palm. You drink awkwardly. It tastes faintly of dust and old rope. A fly lands on the pile of finished forms. You brush it away with the edge of your tablet. The tablet slips and smears the last name on the list. You rewrite it as best you remember. You get the order wrong. You leave it. You note your own reports as logged on a bark slip and insert it into your satchel. It joins 3 others from previous days. You haven't filed those yet. No one's asked. You glance once more at the scribe. Still asleep. You stand. Your knees ache. You lift your satchel. The binding cord has loosened slightly. You pull it tight. You leave the office. No one stops you. The scribe does not stir. The final assignment is listed at the bottom of the wax tablet in smaller script, squeezed beneath a blot of old ink. Evening perimeter walk. Confirm post-runoff status. It isn't marked urgent, but it's underlined. That's usually enough. You return to the lower stretch of channel just before dusk. The light is pale, angled low across the stones, casting long shapes that hide uneven ground. You don't bring a torch. There's one stored at the outpost, but it's missing a cap and leaks oil when tilted. You follow the east side path. It's narrower here, pressed against the base wall by a line of scrub brush that no one's trimmed this year. You move slowly, not for caution, but because the dust has settled into uneven ridges and catches your sandals at odd intervals. The aqueduct above you is silent. No birds, no wind, only the steady sound of water shifting somewhere you can't see. You stop at the first marker post. The stone is still warm from the sun. You place your palm flat against it. The heat is faint, already fading. It's often said Roman aqueducts could maintain temperature balance through mass and insulation. Some studies note nighttime inspections revealed hidden issues, expansion cracks, drainage backflow, sudden silences. Silence is not always a good sign. You pause beside a side channel. The ground is damp, but there's no visible leak. The water must have escaped earlier in the day. You record trace runoff, dry source. That wording tends to pass review. Farther along, a broken tile clinks underfoot. You stop. It's half buried, curved at one end. Not from the aqueduct, possibly roof discard from the nearby storehouse. You move it aside and note the location. Foreign debris near wall base. You reach a small culvert. It's clear, mostly. Some leaves cling to the edge. One has turned black, pressed flat under a trickle of moisture. You nudge it away with your stylus. It tears, but the channel flows clean afterward. You do not mark this. Not everyone knows that in colder provinces night checks were performed in pairs. The rule wasn't for safety, but accuracy. Duplicate confirmation reduced complaints. In warmer regions, solo walks remain the norm, especially where disputes were rare and enforcement intermittent. A frog croaks from the channel bed. You look down but can't see it. You mark wildlife presence, passive. It's a phrase that means nothing, but appears official. You round a bend and stop at the base of a tall support arch. One joint has shed a fine trail of dust, possibly from expansion or fatigue. You scratch it gently with your thumb. The dust crumbles. You sniff once. Dry limestone. Nothing sulphurous. You write. Joint wear. Surface only. A patrol dog appears at the ridge. It stops, stares, then sniffs the air and continues walking. It doesn't approach. You don't acknowledge it. You sit briefly on a flat rock near the base of the arch. Your knees ache from earlier. You drink once from your pouch. The water is warmer now than before. You finish it and cap it loosely. You take out the wax tablet and check the assignment line again. It hasn't changed. You return the tablet to the satchel, now heavier from accumulated notes and objects. Chalk, a bent nail, a scroll that may have belonged to no one. You don't sort it. The mist begins rising from the valley. It stays low near the ground, curling at the base of the channel and the weeds. You walk slowly through it, not for effect, but because it hides the small ridges that catch your step. You pass one more runoff hatch. It hums faintly. That's normal, though no one's written down what normal sounds like. You reach the end post. There's a brazier nearby, used for signalling in colder months. The coals inside are cold. You don't light them. That would require permission and more oil. You take out a slip of bark. You write, "Walk complete. No obstruction. No breach." The bark curls slightly as you hold it. You press your seal into the edge. It barely leaves a mark. You tuck the slip into the mouth of an amphora near the path. It already contains several notes. Some are yours, some aren't. No one's emptied it in weeks. You turn back toward the hill. You do not check the brazier again. Let's step back and look at Roman water systems. For most people in this era, they shaped where you lived, how long you lived, and what illness you eventually developed. And while the empire's aqueducts remain architectural icons, the water they carried wasn't always clean, and often wasn't intended for drinking at all. Aqueducts moved water. That was the priority. Purity was secondary, when considered at all. Water was collected from springs, lakes, and sometimes rivers, then routed over vast distances. The system used gravity, slight gradients, and careful channeling. The open-air segments left it exposed to dust, animals, debris, and the frequent curiosity of citizens. In theory, the settling tanks, known as castella, filtered out sediment. In practice, most of the real cleaning happened incidentally, when silt fell to the bottom, or when enough build-up slowed the flow until someone chipped it loose. Even major cities like Rome, with 11 aqueducts, had to contend with contamination. Despite appearances, these grand systems were rarely about personal hydration. Most aqueduct water went to public fountains, bathhouses, latrines, and ornamental displays. Drinking water came from wells, cisterns, or specific taps, often separate from the general flow. The further you were from the urban core, the more likely your primary source involved hauling. One lesser-known workaround. In rural towns, people sometimes waited near settling basins to collect overflow. The water was slightly clearer if tepid. Some even inserted reeds through cracks in the stone to act as makeshift filters. Whether it helped is debatable. There is disagreement among scholars on how much access truly improved. Some argue the aqueduct system revolutionized sanitation and public health. Others say it redistributed risk, moving contaminated water more efficiently without solving the underlying exposure. One source describes a dispute in Baiae, where wealthier households diverted flow from a local aqueduct and left downstream residents with stagnant runoff. A magistrate ruled the system was functioning as built. No repairs followed. The larger contradiction was this: the system was advanced, but its benefits were uneven. Rome's water wealth did not reach its labourers equally. In villas, fountains flowed over marble. In tenements, people boiled whatever came from the pipe, if they had one. Some cities developed alternative strategies. In Antioch, residents dug small feeder trenches from the main channels to private gardens, often illegally. In Lugdunum, officials issued rotating permits to access municipal outlets. Enforcement was loose, and bribery was common. Records suggest that even engineers acknowledged limitations. An inscription from a technician in Hispania reads, "Aqua venit, sed non mansit." The water comes, but it does not stay. It's unclear if the phrase was literal or a form of professional resignation. And so the system endured. Pressurized where possible, sedimented everywhere, occasionally clean, rarely fair. Aqueducts fed baths and fountains first, people second. Across much of the Roman Empire, maintenance was less about fixing and more about confirming that someone had noticed the problem. In cities, towns, and outposts alike, inspection served as the official response. Repairs, when they came, arrived later, if at all. Documentation formed the backbone of this process. Wax tablets, bark slips, notched slates, and stamped scrolls recorded conditions along aqueduct cisterns, public basins, and underground lead lines. Inspectors were expected to note changes, flag irregularities, and return with observations. Few were empowered to act directly. The system functioned by accumulation. Reports fed scrolls, scrolls fed offices, offices fed benches of clerks. The response cycle began only when the right combination of urgency, personnel, and weather aligned. And when that happened, the initial problem had often grown or changed form entirely. In the provincial city of Augusta Raurica, near the Rhine frontier, a broken inflow channel was documented 5 times in a single year, with 5 different conclusions. Stone worn, flow weak, flow ceased, attempted realignment, and finally, awaiting quarry stone. Archaeological evidence shows the repair was never made. Instead, a wooden trough was installed above the breach and reinforced with rope. The rope decayed, the trough collapsed. Water resumed its original path through the broken channel. Despite appearances, this wasn't always due to incompetence. Civic officials worked within narrow logistical limits. Municipal funds, pecunia publica, were limited, often diverted to projects with greater visibility or political necessity. Forums, temples, city walls. A new aqueduct tile seldom won a crowd. One historical truth: most Roman cities allocated annual budgets for infrastructure upkeep, but these were often exhausted by festivals, tax collection shortfalls, or sudden military requisitions. Inspection logs became tools for delay, evidence that something had been addressed, if only on paper. In some provinces, the logistical problems were compounded by geography. In Numidia, a replacement sluice might take 3 weeks to arrive by donkey cart, travelling through river valleys prone to flooding. In Western Asia Minor, records show that repair tools were sometimes shared between municipalities on a rotating schedule. Each town had a half-month allotment to request chisels, mortar basins, or wheeled scaffolds. One surviving list from Laodicea lists 12 pending requests for the same plaster bucket. There is scholarly debate about how intentional these delays were. Some argue the slow pace was bureaucratic inefficiency. Others suggest a kind of pragmatic stalling. Resources were scarce, and formal delay allowed towns to sidestep public blame while minimising expense. An unfixed problem, written down enough times, ceased to be urgent. One lesser-known workaround occurred in Noricum, where local residents began sealing leaks with hardened goat fat mixed with crushed brick. The method worked poorly in summer but held well in winter. These repairs were unofficial and sometimes removed when formal teams arrived, then immediately redone once the teams left. The inspection itself became ritual. A typical morning might involve an inspector walking a segment of aqueduct, stylus in hand, checking marks left by the previous week's walk. They would note changes, if any, and re-record the findings in new phrasing. No deviation, still flowing, minor shift. The term signalled presence more than condition. Functional versus superficial contrast was constant. A channel might look sound but flow weakly due to upstream debris. A wall might lean but pose no immediate danger. Inspectors were taught not to speculate. If a fault couldn't be measured or seen directly, it wasn't filed. At the administrative level, response patterns varied. In Tarsus, repairs were often delayed pending imperial correspondence, especially under Antoninus Pius, whose reign prioritised grain shipments over public works. In contrast, the city of Emerita Augusta in Lusitania maintained a rare surplus in its civic fund, and occasionally completed preventative repairs, though one letter from the governor warns against creating need where none has yet appeared. Surviving anecdote. A complaint tablet found near a spring outside Brixia records a civilian's frustration. The inspection man comes, he walks, he writes, he returns, the pipe still leaks. My neighbour builds a channel with his son. The inspection man returns. He writes again. The complaint is unsigned. The pipe was never rerouted. Over time, temporary fixes became permanent. A tile weighted with a stone, a leak contained with wool, a wedge cut from a table leg. The line between official and improvised blurred until most towns operated on a blend of both. What worked stayed. What didn't was filed. Tool loss became a common footnote. Shared ladders, chipped chisels, snapped levels. Inventories were kept, sometimes carved into wood slats mounted to interior doors. More than one workshop listed tools by description, not name. The long one, the cracked one, the rope that used to be longer. When replacements were requested, forms were submitted in duplicate. One to the office, one to the archive, neither always read. Tone summary line. It wasn't glamorous. It was just life, and it wore people down. This was how public systems endured, not through speed, but through recording. Problems could outlast the people who filed them. The file became the fix, and so it stayed, until the next disaster. Every aqueduct leaked. This was not a failure of engineering. It was an accepted part of the system. From the earlier segments built under Augustus to late imperial extensions in the Greek East, water loss was built into the calculations. The question wasn't whether it would leak, but how much, how fast, and for how long before someone was expected to act. Loss came in many forms: evaporation from open channels, seepage through mortar joints, hairline cracks in limestone, structural shifting from tree roots or unstable ground. The Empire's engineers understood these vulnerabilities. They simply calibrated around them. One historical truth: Roman aqueducts were often overbuilt, carrying more water than strictly necessary to offset known losses. The Aqua Marcia, one of the longer Roman lines, may have lost over 30% of its flow before reaching the city. That was still considered a success. In cities like Caesarea Maritima and Carthago Nova, engineers installed secondary side channels to collect excess or escaped flow. These were often shallow, carved into the same bedrock as the main line, directing water towards cisterns or agriculture. The main system continued leaking. The workaround simply made use of it. Despite the scale of these operations, few repairs were immediate. The standard procedure for leaks involved observation, marking, remarking, and eventually documenting seepage levels against a known baseline. A new leak became a report, an old one became a feature. A lesser-known fact was the use of lead sheeting packed with wool, wedged into joints as a temporary seal. In Africa proconsularis, these were sometimes weighted with broken amphora handles to hold them in place. The system worked until the next shift in temperature or footing dislodged it. When that happened, the seal often disappeared entirely, carried downstream. Records from Ephesus show a trend of overlapping leak entries, inspectors revisiting the same breach with slightly different phrasing. Drip visible, trickle moderate, flow stable, source unknown. This wasn't redundancy, it was risk management. Each entry moved responsibility further from the moment of collapse. There is scholarly disagreement on how tolerances were set. Some argue a system of informal thresholds existed. If water loss remained under a certain visible spread, no action was required. Others claim loss acceptability was political, defined by proximity to forums, temples, or villas. A leak behind a bathhouse might merit a same-week patch. One outside a tannery might never be addressed. Over time, cities developed their own language of delay. In Thessalonica, inspectors used coloured chalk to indicate status. A white X meant reviewed. A red V meant variance noted. A circle meant the last person forgot their chalk. These marks often faded before decisions were made. Functional versus superficial contrast appeared frequently in leak sites. A well-maintained outer wall might hide a saturated core. Conversely, a visibly stained surface might prove harmless after excavation. To avoid overpromising, inspectors relied on neutral phrasing, flow within bounds, discharge consistent, surface anomaly noted. There are surviving examples of compensatory design. In Ansira, builders widened channel beds near unstable slopes to catch overflow and redirect it. In the eastern hills of Bithynia, sloped tile inserts were placed beneath known weak points, not to stop leaks, but to carry them cleanly away from footpaths. One surviving record scratched into the plaster of a tool station near Apollonia reads, "Tile replaced 4 times, leak returns, stone unchanged. No date, no signature. Possibly left by an apprentice, possibly left as warning." In agricultural zones, leak water was frequently captured without permission. Olive farmers in southern Hispania built stone gutters beneath the arches and ran them to their groves. Some were fined, many were not. The water was already leaving the system. Redirection felt harmless. This blurred the line between defect and utility. In several towns, scheduled inspections noted leaks with no urgency. Beneficial escape. Productive spill. Assists orchard. Later, inspectors sometimes recorded the same points as unsanctioned diversion. In practice, acceptable loss became a civic negotiation. Inspectors, magistrates, workers, and citizens all participated, each defining harm through the lens of inconvenience. Until then, the water moved where it moved, and so the leaks remained, patched, repurposed, renamed, or simply absorbed into the rhythm of the aqueduct itself. Infrastructure in the Roman world was often credited to emperors, engineers, and the gods. Stones bore the names of governors, inscriptions honoured patrons. But the systems themselves, the daily functions, the physical strain, the hand-worn tools, relied on people who left few marks behind. The majority of aqueduct work was manual. It was repetitive, fragmented, and invisible until it failed. Inscriptions rarely name these workers. Their roles were described, if at all, in lists: cutter, loader, mortar man, wheel turner, rope holder, plasterer. Most operated outside formal guilds, hired as needed through local intermediaries or assigned through civic obligation. Surviving records confirm that aqueduct maintenance, especially outside major cities, depended heavily on temporary and regional labour, slaves, freedmen, seasonal workers, and in some cases military auxiliaries on civic rotation. Few were formally trained. Most learned by repetition or direct instruction. In a typical team, one worker applied sealant, another ground lime, a third scraped residue from stone with a chisel repurposed from carpentry. Tools were shared, errors were absorbed, schedules were elastic, wages, where paid, varied. Some provinces compensated in coin, others used grain. In parts of Moesia, field labourers assigned to aqueduct sites received nothing directly, but their village taxes were reduced by a marginal figure, sometimes 1%, sometimes nothing that could be confirmed in writing. Some crews in the hill towns of Cappadocia turned to a workaround of their own, using boiled animal glue and dusted ash to fill minor breaches. The result was weak but quick drying, and was sometimes passed off as a temporary fix until an inspector could be summoned. The inspector, in turn, often filed the fix as acceptable, knowing no alternative had been supplied. Workers came from wherever hands were cheap. In southern Gaul, entire teams were pulled from nearby lime kilns. In Judea, labour was supplemented by men reassigned from roadwork following imperial detours. In Britannia, labourers moved between bathhouses and aqueducts depending on weather. There is no formal record of training methods. One carved lintel in a Sicilian work hut reads, "Hit stone where soft, listen always." No name, no date, possibly instruction, possibly warning. Despite the official structures, much of the labour was improvisational. Work orders might be delivered by a clerk who'd never visited the site. Materials arrived late or in insufficient quantity. Water continued to move whether repairs were finished or not. Scholars debate whether this workforce constituted a class. Some argue these were simply rural poor swept into city maintenance cycles. Others suggest an emerging subclass of civic labourers existed, men who moved from one site to another, known by face but rarely recorded by name. In many regions, these workers lived at or near the job site, tents, storage rooms, stone sheds marked municipal use. A site near Lambasis, in modern-day Algeria, contains 3 stone bunks scratched with tally marks, and one phrase, "Mine today, stone tomorrow." Functional versus superficial roles often blurred. A man tasked with checking sluice flow might also be asked to haul sand, fetch food, or quiet an animal left tied too long in the sun. There was no clear demarcation between engineering and support, only results. Pay, when tracked, was inconsistent. One contract from Bostra lists 10 denarii for lime work and 2 for dust cleaning. A second scroll from the same year lists food and shelter in place of coin. Whether this reflected difference in status, time, or proximity to a magistrate is unknown. A fragment tells the rest. On a tile shard near Nicomedia, a worker etched a line while waiting for his supervisor. Water waited. I did not. The tile was found wedged into a wall, unused. A stylus scratch had partially erased the message, possibly by the supervisor himself. There are few depictions of this labour. In one mosaic, a man holds a trowel and a block of stone. His face is crude, his posture stooped. The caption reads, "He levels." Nothing more. Elsewhere, a funerary stele in Lusitania includes a carving of a man with a coiled rope and bucket. No water is visible, only tools. Workaround or cultural quirk. In areas with limited access to stone, crews reused broken amphorae as tile spacers and channel plugs. In one case, 4 amphora and X were found embedded in a channel wall in sequence, mortared with ash and pig hair. The repair held for nearly 5 years, until one cracked under pressure and was replaced with a sandal sole. In rare cases, a worker's name appears in graffiti. Titus drilled here. Lucio fell, then got up. No ladder again. These inscriptions were never sanctioned and were sometimes scratched out by supervisors. A few remain legible, hidden behind wall panels or beneath stairwells. There is limited evidence that labourers organised. No formal unions, no collective action. But some sites show patterns, shared meals, repeated names on tool lists, tallies carved in the same hand across multiple locations. Suggestive, but not conclusive. It wasn't celebrated, it was tolerated, and mostly it was forgotten. Water kept moving, but hands did the work, and so the system endured, quietly, roughly, and mostly undocumented. By the later empire, inspection had become its own structure, separate from repair, separate from upkeep, sometimes even separate from utility. Water flowed, reports were filed, interventions happened when they could, but the act of noting remained constant, formalised into something more procedural than responsive. Across regions from Lusitania to Syria, inspectors walked fixed routes, some daily, some weekly, some only when a complaint was lodged. The variation depended less on urgency and more on tradition. Established paths carved into duty rosters, often unchanged for decades. Here's how the system was generally understood. Inspection served 3 official purposes: confirming flow, identifying faults, and demonstrating civic diligence. The last mattered most. A marked tablet or signed scroll filed where it could be seen proved that a city had looked at its own infrastructure. Whether or not it could fix it was another matter entirely. It's well documented that under Hadrian, new imperial guidelines mandated standardised reports for major urban aqueducts. Identical formatting, wax seal imprint, legible script, and no abbreviations. But in provinces, interpretation varied. In Coptos, tablets were wrapped in linen and stored in ceramic jars. In Salona, clerks scratched notes directly onto wooden lids of the inspection boxes themselves. Each form had space for weather, observations, name of inspector, and recommended action. The last line was most often left blank. Inspectors rarely travelled alone. A typical team included one observer, one marker, and one document handler. The observer pointed. The marker used chalk, charcoal, or wax paint to leave a physical note on stone. The document handler, sometimes a boy, sometimes a conscript, copied the notation to the tablet. Roles rotated, except for the final signature, which belonged to the senior man. Often, he had done none of the actual checking. In towns with few literate staff, pre-carved tablets with fill-in-the-blank phrases were commonly reused. One from Arelate reads, "Water flow is blank. Stone at blank shows blank. No further blank." The last space was usually filled with remark. Inspection schedules were rarely questioned. In Tamugadi, the aqueduct was inspected every 7th day, even during droughts. The path was followed whether or not water was flowing. The act of walking mattered more than the content of the walk. What looked stable wasn't always sound. Despite the ritual, real faults slipped through. A weeping joint might be marked as minor erosion. A hairline fissure near a pressure lock might go unnoted. The assumption was simple. Anything dangerous would announce itself through noise, discoloration, or collapse. In some towns, chalk marks on stone functioned as informal status indicators. An X meant checked. A dot meant pending. A circle meant someone had been there but forgot their marking tool. These signs remained visible for weeks, sometimes months, until rain washed them away, or a child drew something else on top. Recovered records show that in Aquincum, a storage room yielded over 70 wax tablets filed in no apparent order. Some were blank, some duplicated. One included the line, "Stone holding but looks unhappy." Another ended mid-sentence, "Recommend replacing the..." The name signed was abbreviated. The seal too faded to identify. Discrepancies were common. One inspector's urgent became another's review later. Flow estimates varied depending on how full the stylus tip was. Recommendations were often softened over time. What began as unsafe pressure became not ideal, then unchanged, then routine. Historians argue whether this system was intentionally opaque. Some suggest the shifting language protected cities from imperial scrutiny, allowing local officials to manage appearances. Others suggest it reflected genuine uncertainty. Minor faults rarely followed clear progressions, and ambiguity reduced liability. One inspection note from Apamea reads, "Visible seepage, unclear whether old or new." The same note appears again 7 months later, written by a different hand. Markers developed habits. Some favoured corners, others marked near inscriptions. A few preferred under arches to avoid sun damage. In one site in Siren, 32 chalk marks were found clustered within a 4-metre stretch, none within the 20 metres beyond it. Possibly shade, possibly avoidance. The deeper truth is simple. It wasn't the outcome that mattered. It was that someone had walked, written, and filed. Paperwork became its own infrastructure. In Eberacum, wooden tablets were stored in a chest marked Archive, though no one recalls ever reading them. In Nicopolis, inspections were filed with coin tallies and livestock reports. The assumption was, if it was recorded, it was addressed. Failure, when it came, was rarely attributed to negligence. More often, it was labelled an unexpected breach. Notes would follow. A new cycle of inspection would begin. In practice, a common workaround emerged. Some inspectors left private marks for themselves, dots below knee height, carvings under ledges, a wax blot beneath a rock. These signals allowed them to avoid remeasuring the same faults. A curved scratch meant recorded. A double scratch meant ignore. Over time, the language of inspection became internal. Stylus pressure, word order. The use of firm instead of stable. A known inspector might communicate volumes in 3 lines. A new one might file 10 pages and say less. It wasn't clarity, it was habit. The Empire's systems did not always depend on immediate function. They depended on knowing when something had been seen. And so inspection continued, formally, informally, imperfectly, but always visibly. And now, entries complete. No further observation scheduled. Tablet filed, seal cooled, marker returned. Chalk marks on the wall remain, if weather permits. Flow noted, pressure steady, dust minimal, no obstruction flagged for removal, tools accounted for, scrolls placed in order, used, unused, partial. The amphora near the post still holds last week's slips. No new instructions posted. Inspection concluded. Site unchanged. Channel functioning within tolerances. Visible joints stable. Ambient noise consistent. Arch shadows receding. Wind low. Brazier not in use. No further action at this time. End of section. End of shift. End of entry.